Roanoke Island, August 18, 1590. John White comes ashore. After 3 years away, the settlement has been fortified. Every house has been taken down. Not one living person. He is looking for his daughter. He is looking for his granddaughter, who was born here. He left 115 people here 3 years ago. His account of what he found that morning was published in 1600 and survives in full. It contains a detail that almost every retelling of this story gets wrong. John White was not an explorer by trade. He was a watercolor painter, the most accomplished visual recorder of the eastern seaboard's Algonquian peoples of his generation. His paintings are in the British Museum today. He came to Roanoke because his daughter was here. In January 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh approved a corporate charter for what he called the City of Raleigh. White was named governor. The intended destination was Chesapeake Bay, not Roanoke Island. That distinction will matter. About 115 colonists, middle-class Londoners mostly, 17 women, 11 children. White's daughter Eleanor was among them, heavily pregnant. Her husband, Ananias Dare, was one of White's 12 assistants. They never reached Chesapeake Bay. The fleet's pilot, a Portuguese privateer named Simon Fernandes, put them ashore at Roanoke in July 1587 and refused to take them further. The sailing season was running short. He had Spanish ships to chase. The island had been a military outpost before. Lane's first colony had lasted 1 year, from 1585 to 1586, and ended badly. Lane had murdered the local Roanoke chief Wingina. When the 1587 colonists arrived, all that remained of Grenville's follow-up garrison was one skeleton. Within days, a colonist named George Howe was killed by the Roanoke tribe. White ordered a retaliatory strike. His men attacked the wrong village. Croatoan allies, not the hostile Roanoke. An Algonquian man named Manteo, who had traveled to England and back with these colonists, smoothed over the damage. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth in that battered settlement on an island nobody had wanted to land on. They named the baby Virginia, the first English child born in the Americas. White was now a grandfather. 35 days after landing, the colonists voted unanimously to send White back to England for supplies. They believed he had the connections to get them. He was reluctant to leave a newborn granddaughter. He went anyway. Before leaving, White and the colonists agreed on a signal. If they relocated, they would carve their destination on a tree or post. If they left under duress, under threat, they would carve a Maltese cross above the name. That cross was the distress marker. No cross meant a planned departure. White reached England in late 1587. Then the Anglo-Spanish War consumed everything. The Queen commandeered every available ship. In early 1588, White obtained 2 small vessels, the Brave and the Roe, but French pirates intercepted them. The mission collapsed before it started. Sir Francis Bacon wrote in 1597, "It is the sinfullest thing in the world to forsake or destitute a plantation once in forwardness. For besides the dishonor, it is the guiltiness of blood, of many commiserable persons." He was writing about Raleigh's apparent indifference. The colonists had been waiting 2 years. White finally secured passage in March 1590 on a privateering fleet. Not a relief expedition. He was a passenger with no authority to redirect the ships. The colonists were 3 years into whatever had happened to them. On the night of August 17th, they saw fires burning on the north end of Roanoke Island. They fired a trumpet. They sang familiar English songs across the dark water. No answer came. They waited until morning. Morning. White and his party came ashore. The settlement had been transformed. Houses taken down. Heavy goods, iron bars, lead ingots, iron shot, cached inside the walls. And around the entire site, a new palisade had been built. White called it very fort-like. This was not wreckage. This was construction. Then, Approaching the palisade, they saw letters carved on a tree at the entrance. C-R-O. 3 letters. Bark stripped back. Clean cuts. White wrote that he knew immediately what they signified, according to a secret token agreed upon between them and me at my last departure from them. Then they reached the gate. On a chief post, 5 feet from the ground, bark stripped clean, was the full word. White recorded it exactly as he read it. In fair capital letters was graven Croatoan without any cross or sign of distress. No Maltese cross, the distress marker they had agreed on. Absent. White's own words, in his 1600 published account. I greatly joyed that I had safely found a certain token of their safe being at Croatoan, which is the place where Monteo was born, and the savages of the island are friends. He was joyful. White believed the colonists were alive on Croatoan Island, what we now call Hatteras Island, roughly 50 miles south, with Monteo's people, who had been their allies since the attack on the wrong village. He also found his own chests inside the palisade. His books were torn, his maps had rotted in the rain, his armor had rusted through. He concluded that the hostile Dasamongponke people had looted them after the colonists left. The colonists had been gone long enough for iron to eat through plate. That night, White recorded his plan. He wrote, "The next morning, it was agreed by the captain and myself, with the master and others, to weigh anchor and go for the place at Croatoan where our planters were. They were going to find them." The next morning, a storm came in. The fleet lost 2 anchors. One ship nearly ran aground in the shallows. The captains agreed the season was too far gone. They turned the ships north, then east. They did not go to Croatoan Island. Put yourself in that moment. White had the answer. He had the word. He had agreed to sail there in the morning. A storm took the anchors. The captains made the call. He stood on that deck and watched the coastline fall behind him for the last time. White reached Plymouth on October 24th, 1590. He never returned to the New World. He retired to Raleigh's estates in Ireland and disappeared from the record in the early 1600s. He never saw Eleanor again. He never saw Virginia Dare again. In 1602, Raleigh sent a Captain Samuel Mace to search for survivors near what is now Oregon Inlet. Mace did not investigate. He claimed bad weather and lost tackle prevented it. He returned empty-handed. That was the last organized English attempt. For over a century, no English person set foot on Croatoan Island to look. No ship went to check. The carvings had pointed clearly to a destination. Nobody followed the arrow. In 1701, 111 years after White left, an English explorer named John Lawson visited Hatteras Island. He found descendants of the Croatoan tribe living there. He recorded something they told him about their ancestors. Several of their ancestors, they said, had been white. Some had gray eyes. Lawson wrote it down. It was the first ground-level account from Croatoan since White had sailed away. It pointed directly at Hatteras Island, exactly where the carvings had said to look. The legend says the colonists vanished without a trace. White's own published account says the opposite. 2 deliberate carvings, matching the agreed signal exactly. The site fortified and orderly. White himself called it a clear sign of their safe departure. The no-trace version is not in the record. Popular retellings typically collapse the 2 carvings into one. A single word on a single tree. White's account records CRO on a tree at the approach path and Croatoan on a separate post of the palisade. 2 carvings, 2 deliberate acts. The detail has been simplified out of almost every version of this story for 400 years. William Strachey was secretary of the Jamestown Colony, founded in 1607. He wrote a history of the Virginia Territory around 1612 and recorded what local people told the Jamestown settlers about Roanoke. The paramount chief Wahunsena Kao, known to the English as Powhatan, had reportedly ordered a massacre. Strachey wrote that most of the Roanoke colonists had lived peaceably with an inland tribe for roughly 20 years. Then Wahunsena Kao had them killed, on his priest's advice. 7 survivors fled. 4 men, 2 boys, one woman, toward the Chowan River. Strachey's book was not published until 1849. If Strachey's account is accurate, the colonists split. Most went inland, perhaps 50 miles, as White had recorded they planned. Some may have reached Croatoan. They survived with local Algonquian people for nearly 2 decades before Wahunsa destroyed them. That is not a disappearance. That is a history. In 1998, a team including archaeologist Mark Horton of Bristol University began excavating the Cape Creek site on Hatteras Island. On Croatoan, they dug deeper and more systematically than anyone before them. From layers dating to the late 1500s, they recovered border ware pottery, English food storage ceramics that stopped being imported to the Americas in the early 17th century, iron bars, a copper ingot, gun flintlock fragments, and a 10-carat gold signet ring. English artifacts, Roanoke era, on Croatoan Island. At the place, the colonists said they were going. This is not a theory. This is material culture dug from datable strata on the exact island named on the post. Then there are the inland sites. Archaeologists identified 2 locations, Site X near Albemarle Sound and Site Y near Salmon Creek in Bertie County. Both yielded border ware pottery and Roanoke-era English ceramics. Both are consistent with colonists having moved, in White's words, 50 miles into the Main. Dozens of excavations on Roanoke Island itself have found almost nothing from 1587. Lane's 1585 military colony has left remnants. White's 1587 settlement, Eleanor's settlement, Virginia's settlement, has not. Some historians believe it has eroded into the sea. The island has been losing ground to the water for centuries. In 1937, a man found a stone near the Chowan River. Carved on it were words purportedly from Eleanor White Dare, reporting deaths. Ananias, Dare, and Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. By 1940, 48 such stones had surfaced. The final 47 were connected to a Georgia stonecutter named Bill Eberhart and discredited by 1941. The first stone, the Chowan River stone, remains unresolved. Most scholars reject it. A minority of Elizabethan historians say its language is not demonstrably inconsistent with the period. Nobody knows. It sits in an archive, carved and silent. Here is what the documented record actually supports. The colonists left Roanoke in a planned, organized relocation, not in panic. They fortified the site. They cached heavy goods. They built a palisade. They left 2 deliberate carvings naming their destination, exactly according to the pre-agreed plan. Then they went there. Croatoan, Hatteras Island, is where the archaeology has found English artifacts in late 16th century layers. It is where Lawson found people in 1701 saying some ancestors had been white. It is where Montejo was from. It is where White believed, joyfully, that his daughter was. Nobody went to look. White could not get the ships back. Mace refused to approach the search zone. The Jamestown settlers heard the story of a massacre, applied it to all the colonists, and moved on. The single most actionable clue in the case was never followed up by anyone with the means to do it. The 400-year framing of this case as a mystery of complete disappearance is the embellishment. White wrote the answer down in 1590 and published it in 1600. The colonists told him where they were going. The problem was never what happened to the colony. The problem was that nobody went to Croatoan. White spent his remaining years in Ireland. His watercolors of the Algonquian people, made on the 1585 expedition before any of this, are considered the most important visual record of a pre-contact Eastern Seaboard Native American society in existence. The paintings survived. Everything else did not. Virginia Dare appears in the historical record for the last time in the baptism entry that White himself witnessed and recorded. She would have been 3 years old on the day he came back and found the carvings. August 18th, 1590, her 3rd birthday, the day he turned around and sailed home. The archaeology at Cape Creek is not finished. Site X and Site Y have not been fully excavated. The ground under Hatteras Island has not been fully read. The question is no longer where the colonists went. The question is what they found when they got there, how long they lasted, and whether the soil still holds the answer.